Avengers!
So we all know of Captain America, right? The iconic and popular Marvel Comics character that everyone has at least heard of. So it should come as no surprise that the Captain has showed up in other media such as film serials, bootleg Turkish knockoffs,
Adios, Mafia.
failed TV pilots, a lot of cartoons since the 60s, and of course in film, primarily those that are set in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. One piece of media that Captain America has appeared in is of course in video games. If Spider-Man and the Hulk have been in some video games, then it should be no surprise that Captain America has been in some games since the 1980s, a lot of which are mostly appearances in other Marvel games. But today, I'm only going to be talking about a Captain America game that a lot of people don't really talk about these days, especially compared to other Marvel games from the same era. The game I'm talking about is none other than Captain America and The Avengers, released for the arcades in 1991 by Data East. You know, that one company whose games are constantly licensed to damn near anyone, and are included on every fucking retro game collection on the planet these days?
Presented by Data East.
Anyways, I'll be talking about every version of Captain America and the Avengers, and seeing all the differences between each port and how they all compare to each other. So Captain America and the Avengers is an arcade game where you play as Captain America, Hawkeye, Vision, and Iron Man, with you being able to select and play as whichever character you like most whenever you start the game or whenever you die. Other Marvel Comics heroes such as Quicksilver, the Wasp, Namor, and Wonder Man all make cameos and appearances and assist you in battle throughout all 5 levels of the game. Yeah, the game only has 5 levels, which are called scenes in the game. It seems kinda small and very minuscule when you compare it to Konami's X-Men and Sega's Spider-Man. But keep in mind that this was an arcade game meant for the arcades. Plus the game itself has a decent length for an arcade beat 'em up despite seeming so short. I mean, the game felt a little bit longer for me, given how many times I kept dying and continuing with the game's unlimited continues. Well, it is unlimited if you keep putting coins into the arcade cabinet. Anyways, the game's plot is shown in these comic panels throughout the game, and the plot itself is pretty simple and very straightforward, as it's essentially about the Captain America villain, the Red Skull, assembling an army of villains and henchmen to take over the world, with the Avengers needing to stop them in order to save the world. While the plot is simple, I do think that it works, because a game like this doesn't need a complex plot, since it gets right to the point for the motives of the characters and its gameplay, the latter of which is very important to any game. Also, am I the only one who thinks that the Red Skull wearing this dope-ass business suit looks hella good on him? Now, the game is of course a 2D beat-em-up similar to games like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and The Simpsons Arcade, and much like those games, Captain America and the Avengers supports 4 players. Well, some versions at least. This was because there were 4-player versions of the game, as well as 2-player variants that were released into arcades at the same time. Anyways, you play as one of 4 of the Avengers, beating up bad guys and bosses along the way throughout all 5 levels. Now, like a lot of beat-em-ups, all 4 of the Avengers basically play the exact same, as well as being able to pick up and throw objects at enemies with the 2 available buttons. They can also do a special move, or an Avenger attack as the game calls it, by pressing jump and attack at the same time with all of the characters essentially functioning the exact same. Cap throws his shield, Hawkeye fires his arrows, while Iron Man and Vision use their energy beams. Really, the only difference I found was that Cap and Hawkeye can do a jump kick attack, while Vision and Iron Man instead hover in the air and fire an energy beam at a downward 45-degree angle. But overall, all of the characters feel perfectly balanced with no character feeling more powerful than the other. So pick whichever character is your favorite and enjoy the game. Now, the game's presentation is pretty good, and I do like the game's sprites for all of the characters, since for being pretty small and simplistic, the devs at Data East managed to capture the designs and likenesses of the iconic Marvel Comics characters very well, since I'm able to easily tell which character is which. The backgrounds are another aspect I like, since they're really well detailed and they perfectly fit in with the game's environments and characters. And of course, you can't forget about the really good parallax scrolling for all 3 shmup segments in the game. Some of you may not know this about me, but I love shmups. I've been getting into them throughout the last couple of years by playing games like Fantasy Zone and Air Zonk, and I really appreciate and love the inclusion of shmup segments in the game, because it's a nice break from the beat 'em up gameplay, since it adds a nice dose of variety and more fun to the game, because these shmup segments are really enjoyable and fun. Shooting enemies while flying as Iron Man and Vision, or flying in this thing as Captain America or Hawkeye, is a great addition to have because I love me some shmup segments in games that aren't shmups. Anyways, the game of course has boss fights where you take on various Marvel villains such as Claw, Whirlwind, Ultron, Crossbones, the Juggernaut, who is looking slightly different, the Mandarin, and much more, including what is obviously a Sentinel from the X-Men, that had its name changed, likely due to legal reasons, since Konami, Sega, and LJN had the video game rights to Marvel's favorite mutants. Also there's this robotic octopus that you fight, whose name is Mech Taco? What? Anyways, by the end of the game you arrive in space on Red Skull's moon base, where you fight him and Mecha Skull, before defeating him and saving the world. Now overall, Captain America and The Avengers is a pretty decent and enjoyable game to play with a friend, or by yourself. The game has fun and enjoyable gameplay, pretty good music, and it was an overall pretty good game to play. So in the end, while the game is no X-Men, Simpsons, or TMNT, I'd still recommend giving the game a try if you could find a way to play it, and if you know, you know. Oh, who am I kidding? Obviously it's through emulation. There you go, that's the answer. It's so easy, everyone knows this. Everyone, I repeat, everyone knows. Just play it through an emulator. Really, that's all you gotta do. I mean, who wouldn't enjoy a game with very clear and beautiful voice samples like these?
You cannot beat me. Avengers Assemble! See my power! You came here to die. Where is the laser? Ask the police. The Avengers! Thank you, Mr. Silver! I can't move! Hey, come on! Thank you, Wonder Man! Okay, go! Oh, no! You can't escape! It's another trap. You stupid men! We'll teach you the meaning of justice!
Now with the game being pretty successful in the arcades, it would of course be ported and released onto other systems, which means I gotta talk about them now. Each and every version, starting with... So many would probably expect Captain America and the Avengers on the NES to be similar to games like TMNT 2 or Double Dragon. You know, a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up on the NES. Those games proved that it was possible to have a beat-em-up on the NES that plays similarly to their arcade counterparts. So it should be reasonable to expect Captain America to have a decent NES port like Ninja Turtles, right? Nope. The game is instead a 2D side-scroller that has absolutely fuck all to do with the arcade version, outside of its name. A few of its villains are here, and its roster where you can play as Captain America and Hawkeye. Hey, where's Iron Man and Vision? What the fuck? It's called Captain America and the Avengers, and yet two of your Avengers aren't even playable? What gives? Well, in the game's opening, it's shown that Iron Man and Vision were captured by the Mandarin, with Cap and Hawkeye needing to rescue them. So why exactly wasn't this game just called Captain America and Hawkeye? I mean, you literally only play as those two characters in the game. Hell, the game doesn't even have the cameos except for the Wasp who tells you shit, while Cap and Hawkeye only respond with Roger Wasp and Thanks Wasp. But my guess as to why the game has the same name as the arcade game was probably for marketing, and because Data East wanted this game to sell well and make money. But either way, it's still strange that Vision and Iron Man aren't even playable. Like, yes, I know there's hardware limitations on the NES, and it likely wouldn't have been possible for 4 players to be on screen at once in an NES beat-em-up, but a game like Ninja Turtles 2 on the NES had all 4 of the fucking turtles that you can select, and while yes, you can only play as 2 turtles in multiplayer, it still proves my point that a port of Captain America on the NES could have worked. So anyways, how is the actual game itself? Well, it's a 2D side-scroller, a very whatever one at that, and one that kinda reminds me of Contra. You travel across the US Mario 3 style to save Iron Man and Vision while fighting bad guys in each level. There's also these mini-bosses who show up every now and then. You alternate between Captain America and Hawkeye after completing a level or after one of them dies. You also have 8 hits and basically only 2 lives with 3 continues. You're able to rescue your kidnapped partner by going back to Florida, which can allow you to swap between heroes anytime during gameplay. Why the hell can't you just do that from the start? Ninja Turtles allowed you to do that from the beginning of the game. Anyways, each hero has their own abilities. Cap obviously throws a shield that can reflect projectiles. He can do this dash attack which can kill enemies, but it doesn't open these capsules with collectibles inside. Honestly, I keep forgetting that this move even exists, and plus it's not even that useful to begin with. Cap can also grab onto these rails while Hawkeye can't for some reason. Okay, so what exactly does Hawkeye do? He shoots an arrow one at a time, and that's it. So what the fuck is the point of playing as Hawkeye, because the only difference between the two is that Hawkeye can shoot his arrows in 5 directions, and that's it. He can't even shoot his arrows downward, and that just fucking blows. Contra allows you to shoot downwards, and that game feels more faster and is generally a lot more fun and more memorable than this game. Anyways, let's talk about other stuff like the game's music and presentation. Now the sprites and graphics are decent enough for the NES, and the music itself is pretty good, with each hero having their own theme when you play as them. However, the music itself pales in comparison to Silver Surfer on the NES. Now while I do enjoy the music in Captain America and The Avengers on NES, there's just one problem. You'll be hearing the same songs over and over again. You'll constantly be hearing Captain America's theme, Hawkeye's theme, and the map theme over and over again. Like, these aren't bad songs, it's just that I want some variety because the fucking monotony of constantly hearing the same goddamn songs is driving me insane. It just makes me wish for variety, which is something that most games need. Secret word being variety. Which brings me to my next point, the general lack of variety. Now the game generally feels very samey and very boring, because all you're really doing is walking around each respective level, killing bad guys, collecting crap, and collecting these orbs that come out of capsules in order to exit the stage. And you need to find these orbs, otherwise you can't complete the level. This also gets annoying in levels that are largely more exploration and vertical based. Oh yeah, back on the game's lack of variety. Again, the game feels extremely repetitive and I get tired of seeing these same environments over and over again. Even levels with different environments feel the same, since it makes me bored and makes me wish I was playing a better game. At least the arcade game had those shmup stages to spice things up. And for another example, a game like Battletoads had some variety, like the infamous Turbo Tunnels for example. Now obviously I'm no game developer, but I'm just saying, a bit of variety prevents a game from becoming stale and boring, something that Captain America on NES doesn't do. I mean, the original fucking Super Mario Bros. Had more variety, and that game was like 6 years old by the time this came out in late 1991. Anyways, to finish things off, I hate that the game only allows you to move one level at a time, like it's fucking chess or some shit like that. Why couldn't this be like Super Mario Bros. 3? This is especially annoying when you have to rescue your captured teammate, since all I want to do is rescue my teammate, get out of there, and continue the game as normal. Oh yeah, there's also a battle mode where you fight, but I did not play this because I think it's 2-player only, which meant I couldn't play it because why would any of my friends want to play the battle mode in Captain America on NES? Therefore, I have no opinion on it. Also, Iron Man and Vision still aren't playable? Geez, why does this game hate Iron Man and Vision so much? So overall, Captain America on the NES is a game that I really wanted to like, so bad. While it has good music, decent graphics, and is generally better than the shitty Marvel games on the NES, Captain America and the Avengers on NES is basically just a bad and boring version of Contra, even though there's already a bad Contra on NES. The game gets so repetitive and is so boring that it's not even worth playing outside of curiosity's sake. It makes you wish that it could have been a better game, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for the NES. Actually, you're better off playing a game like Ninja Turtles or Batman on NES. So the game would eventually appear on the Sega Genesis, and with this being 16-bit, it should be expected to be a beat-em-up and very similar to the original arcade game. After all, the Sega Genesis was originally designed to be a system that would bring the arcade experience home. I mean, just look at some games like Golden Axe and Ghouls and Ghosts for example. Those games were similar to the original arcade versions, so it should only be fair to have high expectations since we're on Genesis after all. And doesn't Genesis do what Nintendo don't? This specific port of the game was developed by ISCO and Opera House, while Data East only published it. So how exactly would this port look and feel? Cause I mean, Data East didn't develop it, so it has to be pretty different. Well, the Genesis version looks and plays nearly identically to the arcade version. It has all 4 of the Avengers, and it's multiplayer, which means that you can play the game with a friend. While the game itself may be only 2 players instead of 4, I honestly don't mind at all, cause a game like Turtles in Time on Super Nintendo is 2-player only, and that game is awesome regardless. And plus, there were 2-player versions of the original arcade version of Captain America and the Avengers, so it's not a huge bummer. Now, with the Genesis being nowhere near as powerful as the arcades at the time, it should be expected that there's going to be quite a bit of differences. For one, since the game is on a home console, there's no unlimited continues, which means that if you lose all of your lives, you gotta start all over from the beginning of the game. You're also only limited to 7 lives at max after changing some stuff in the settings. Now, because this is on the Sega Genesis, the game's sound and audio sounds like complete fucking dog shit. I mean, just listen to a few of these crusty-ass voice samples.
The Avengers! Avengers assemble! Captain America, Iron Man, Vision, Hawkeye. Okay, go! No! Quicksilver, see my power! You can't escape! You will be the one escaping, you stupid men!
They sound just as shitty and robotic as the voice samples from the Genesis version of Street Fighter 2. Actually, scratch that. I think they sound worse. So the game's music isn't great, but it's not bad. It's similar to the original arcade game, while having that distinctive Genesis sound that can make games sound good, or make some games sound like nails on a chalkboard. But either way, the music is fine and serviceable. Definitely no contender for best Genesis music. So anyways, aside from those minor nitpicks, how is the actual game itself? Well, it's Captain America and the Avengers. It's the exact same game as the arcade version, and it's actually a pretty good and very faithful port. If you ignore the god-awful sound and the sprites just being ever so slightly different simply due to the Genesis's hardware limitations. Everything else is here, from the game's plot and story, controls, all 5 levels, the cameos from the various Marvel superheroes who show up to assist you, the bosses and enemies, being able to change characters after you die, it's fun and enjoyable gameplay, and much more. Another minor complaint that I have is that I wish the special had its own button, instead of having to press jump and attack at the same time. But I'm gonna guess that they kept the controls the exact same as the arcade version simply for consistency's sake, which is honestly fine by me, I guess. So aside from those minor differences, it's still the exact same Captain America game, and it's still a fine and very enjoyable game. So if you were a kid in the 90s who had a Genesis and really wanted to play Captain America at home, then this game does the job, since it's a very identical and faithful port to the arcade original. While the game is no Streets of Rage 2 or TMNT Hyperstone Heist, Captain America and the Avengers on the Sega Genesis is a very serviceable, okay at best, and very overlooked beat 'em up for the system.
The Avengers!
So now that we're on Super Nintendo, you'd expect the game to be better than the Genesis version, right? Well, nope. And boy was I ultra disappointed when I played this version of Captain America and the Avengers. Right off the bat, Data East basically had nothing to do with this port of the game, since the game was instead published by Mindscape, a company that was primarily a publisher who published many classics like Mario's Missing, Mad Max, and The Terminator for NES. The actual port of the game was done by a company called Real Time Associates, a company who made many classics like Dick Tracy, Bug, Bug 2, some Iron Man game, and the all-time great Elmo's Number Journey.
Let's go look for some numbers!
So with that out of the way, what exactly makes this port so disappointing? So while the game does look promising and pretty decent from the start, with graphics and sprites that look similar to the arcade version, as well as the game having the comic panels that were missing in the Genesis version to tell the story. However, don't let those aspects of the game fool you, because this game basically has a monkey paw effect, if that even makes sense. I say that because this version of the game looks and runs like complete ass. First off, the game feels so slow and sluggish, and it doesn't help that you can't run, and the game's jumping makes it feel like you're on the fucking moon. Honestly, the only positive thing that I can really say about this game is that the special is actually its own standalone button, rather than being mapped to both jump and attack. And that's it. Now for a few more things about this version of the game. The game's colors look so muted and dark when compared to the Genesis and arcade version. I mean, it's like a fucking Zack Snyder DC movie with how muted and dark the game's colors look. The game's music is also so boring and forgettable, and I honestly prefer how more upbeat and energetic the game sounds on Genesis, since beat 'em ups should get you pumped up to play, and not get you more bored than watching Thor: The Dark World. Also, it's weird how some of the voice clips are missing when the Super Nintendo was more powerful than the Genesis. Finally, the game oddly feels more difficult than other versions of the game, even on easy mode. I swear, it's not because I'm just fucking terrible at video games. Like, I legit keep getting my ass kicked by all these enemies in the game, and this wouldn't be a problem if it weren't for how fucking awful the controls and gameplay are for this game. So while this version of the game is bad, I wouldn't call this one of the worst games I've played, or even one of the worst home console ports of a game, since there's definitely much worse out there. It's just that this one port had potential to be good, but it just failed to be a good port because it's so obvious that this game was done by a different team who didn't understand the original game, weren't close with the original developers, and were probably just doing this for a simple check. Just stick with the Sega Genesis version if you're looking for a good home console port of Captain America and the Avengers. Next up, we finally reach a handheld system. with that being none other than the Sega Game Gear. It was Sega's answer to Nintendo's Game Boy, as well as essentially being a portable Sega Master System. So with this being on a handheld, it should be expected that this version will be different, since handheld versions were largely different back then. And because, it's Mindscape and Real-Time Associates again. So once again, our friends at Mindscape and Real-Time Associates return for yet another port of Captain America and The Avengers. Let's just get this over with already. So yeah, the game is a beat 'em up and a downgraded port of the arcade version, where you fight various bad guys and Marvel villains in order to defeat the Red Skull and save the world. But wait, something seems different. Something is off. Oh, that's right. The game is actually a 2D side-scrolling beat 'em up rather than your traditional beat 'em up like Streets of Rage, for example. This was something that intrigued me, since it wasn't something I expected. I mean, just looking at some screenshots of the game makes it look like it'll be similar to most other beat 'em ups where you aren't restricted to moving left and right. I mean, just look at the background. It looks like you can freely move around like most other beat 'em ups rather than being limited to just two directions. So anyways, the game is kinda similar to the arcade game. You have the exact same characters, pretty much the same controls but slightly different, same moves and specials. You can swap characters when you die, you can pick up and throw objects at enemies, the shmup stage is present, pretty much the same villains are here, including a yellow juggernaut who poops out dynamite for some reason. Obviously the game is not going to be the exact same as the arcade game. I mean, this is the 8-bit Game Gear after all. For one, Iron Man and Vision for some reason aren't able to fly by themselves, the Sentinel from the shmup level isn't here, and the game is obviously a 2D side-scroller, as I mentioned earlier. To finish things off, the game is short, and I really mean it's short, as the game can essentially be beaten in around 30 minutes. It has the exact same amount of levels as the arcade game, but it's split up into 5 acts per zone, I mean scenes. The game is also what I'd call piss easy, since you can essentially blaze through and beat all of the levels and bosses pretty quickly and easily. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention this, but it feels like you have to be super close and at the right spot in order to hit an enemy or even pick up an object. Also, the game only gives you 3 lives and absolutely no continues or even 1-ups. Likely as a way to keep the game from being too easy, but you can go into the settings to get a total of 5 lives. Wow, very generous. Overall, the game is an alright and fine interpretation of the arcade game. It has decent graphics and sprites, pretty alright music that is a pretty accurate and decent rendition of the arcade game's music, and pretty similar looking levels. The game overall is honestly nothing special, but if you really wanted to play Captain America and the Avengers on the go, then here you go. What you see is what you get. Finally, we have the Game Boy version. And it's not that surprising that a Game Boy version exists, since the Game Boy was the most popular handheld during its heyday. So like the Game Gear version, if you really wanted to play Captain America and the Avengers on the go, then here you go. What you see is what you get. And speaking of the Game Gear version, it's literally the exact same fucking game. Oh, I'm not even exaggerating. Captain America on Game Boy is literally the exact same game as the Game Gear version. The gameplay, level design, and characters are all the exact same. The only difference is that it's on Game Boy, which means that the game obviously doesn't have color, the sound is different, and it just feels like an overall downgrade to the Game Gear counterpart. And also, since this is on Game Boy, the sprites are even more simplified, since the devs only had a few shades of grey to work with on Game Boy hardware. I mean, I can sometimes hardly tell who some of these characters even are, due to how simple they look and how they all kind of blend in together. But aside from all those differences, what else is there to say? My exact same opinions on the Game Gear version of Captain America and the Avengers very much applies to the Game Boy version because after all, they're the exact same game. You're honestly better off playing a much better game for the Game Boy. So in the end, Captain America and the Avengers was an overall pretty decent arcade game that I think has largely been more and more forgotten about as the years go on. And I do think that if you are curious about playing the game for yourself, I'd recommend giving it a try on an emulator, or playing it on the original arcade cabinet if you're lucky enough to even find it. And for the other versions, again, emulation is there, but I'd only recommend the other versions if you're very weird and curious like me. Now to end things off, I thought I'd do a little ranking of sorts where I rank each version from worst to best.
Disappointment in the game of life!
The Super Nintendo version is obviously the worst version. The Game Boy version is next, followed by the Game Gear, which is only better because it's in color. The NES version is next, with the Genesis version following because it's a very accurate and decent port of the original arcade version. And finally, the arcade version is obviously the superior and best version of the game. We all knew that. Anyways, that's all for whatever this review show is called. Have a good day or something.
No matter how strong the forces of